Good afternoon. Today's the 17th of February, and this is the continuation of Level 1 Training, Part 1. And so far, we've done a big picture, about 60,000 feet of what the Navigator is and how it works. Now we're going to start getting back into the individual profiles, understanding the profiles. We ended up with the completion of the Accomplisher. So I'd like to ask, are there any questions anybody has so that we can move forward and make sure that, as we go through this process, please ask the questions. If it's something we'll cover later on, I'll identify that. So with that being said, any questions?
Do you?
Whoop, we lost you, Lori. Uh-oh.
Are you still there?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We lost you. We couldn't hear you.
Okay. It was asking for some PIN or founder hash. My question to you is, do you have any kind of thing that you can email us so I like to put notes right on the slides? My notes when you're talking about something?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Trying to think how we're going to do this because I don't want to send out originals. Let me see if I can send to you the PowerPoint with notes.
That would be great, or just something where we can put notes on. That would be wonderful, where it has enough of the things that I can reference back and forth without having to recopy the entire slide.
Yep. Okay. Okay. Now, also, I wanted to share with you that once we get through these profiles, I will then be sending you the MP4, the videos of the two programs that we're going through now. And then we're also going to be sending to you access to a bookcase. And this bookcase has all of the possible profile combinations, where we go through the dominant and the subordinate. So you'll have an entire library of all the personal profile reports at your disposal. The clients absolutely love that, because if you've got a candidate that's a dominant associator, accomplisher, contributor, you can make access to the report and get the insights. Okay. So we left off at the Accomplisher. This is the drive. Now, one thing you're going to find pretty consistent in franchising is that this is the burning in the belly. This is the key to somebody shifting from employment to empowerment. So depending upon how they score in the Accomplisher is going to give you a great insight in terms of exactly how much of a drive they've got. So when it's below 45%, not much drive at all. They're better off being either an employee or finding a partner that has much more drive than they do. On the other hand, conversely, if they're at the 90 percentile or higher, then entrepreneurship in a franchise is not a good idea. And I cringe every time I see in the publications an ad for franchisees that says entrepreneurs wanted. That is the kiss of death, because you really don't want the entrepreneur in franchising. You want people that have the entrepreneurial qualities, because what's going to happen is they're going to want to start making the rules. And if you remember the story about Alex Roberts and Mr. Handyman and some of the most recent stories I've told you, it's the kiss of death. You really don't want them. So with that, let's go ahead. We'll go through, and now we're into the influencer. Now, the influencer is really a very interesting profile. And remember, out of the four profiles, there isn't any one that's more important than the other. They're all equally as important. We will find a lot of dominant accomplishers and a lot of dominant associators. when you find somebody who's a dominant influencer, this is a sales and marketing person, and we'll get into what the characteristics are. And they're going to come off as charming and confident. They're also going to come off as potentially aggressive. They're naturally persuasive, very creative. They want to be successful. They want to have control. They want to be recognized. And they want to be, depending upon where they score, prestigious, glamorous, highly competitive, and always have a need to win. So if you're ever out on the golf course or you're doing anything that's competitive with an influencer, get out of their way. Because they're going to barge through, they're going to complete their hole or whatever it might be and move on. They're not the kinds of people that are going to sit there and watch and collaborate and be part of what everybody else is doing. And there are images that resonate with the influencer. So, for instance, if we think about what we see on television, whenever you see an ad for like Cadillac, Audi has just started a whole new ad campaign. And what it is, it's a generally done at night. The streets are full of water so that they glow and reflect. It's a hard pounding music in the background, something like the Rolling Stones or whatever it might be. That's gearing that ad towards a customer base comprised of influencers, people that want to be seen. Now, what's really interesting is that when we look at profile combinations, we can actually predict the kinds of cars somebody drives, the kinds of homes that they live in, and the clothes that they wear. I'll give you a real funny story. One of the well-known brands was founded by 5 brothers, but there's 2 brothers that really head it up, and one of them who's the president and the CEO. And as we were going through the Navigator, he said, well, I bet you can't tell me, anything about me. Well, I looked at his profile. He's a high dominant accomplisher and the associator contributor, not so much the influencer. And I said, their offices are in California. I know it's pretty close to the beach. And I said to him, I said, hey, Chad, I bet you're sitting there right now. Your hair's all ruffled. You're in probably a white T-shirt, tattered jeans, and you're wearing Birkenstocks. And all I heard on the other side was quiet, silence. He says, how do you know that? And I explained it to him. He said, well, I bet you can't describe my brother. So I pulled up the brother's profile, and he was an accomplisher, influencer, associator. And I said, well, unlike you, your brother's well-groomed. He wears nice clothes, probably Italian shoes, and he's probably driving either a silver or a black Mercedes convertible. And all I heard was silence. So you'll see as you go through how predictable the profiles and the profile combinations really are. So the influencer is a smaller percentage of the population, very sales-oriented. Now, one thing about the influencer is that they're often overextended financially, meaning they're the kinds of people with that proverbial carrot hanging over them all the time. They go out, they make money, and they spend it. They make money, and they spend it. Their fear is to appear to come off as misguided. They always want to be, the kinds of people that they give off that image that they know what they're doing, because they don't want to reveal, even if it's true, that they lack confidence or that they're confused about something. So if we look at the continuum, at 40%, it begins, but it's really still more supportive. It's not a dominant. At 55%, they're starting to be pretty good at sales and marketing. The lower score for a company like Money Mailer is 60%. Somebody's got the 60% influencer. They've got what it takes with Money Mailer. But that's not necessarily true with other brands. Money Mailer supports them with a great deal of support. So they're not out there pounding the pavement. 92%, anything at 90 to 92% is somebody where the influencer profile has taken control. It's just like an extremist. And at 92%, what happens inevitably is the world revolves around the influencer. They end up becoming incredibly narcissistic, and it's about them. So what happens is that the influencer, as the percentages go up, becomes more selfish. And you'll see the contributor is selfless, very different. So the influencer has a narrow focus. All they want to do is sell. They cannot multitask. They have very strong sales skills, so you want them on the front end, but in a franchise, you want to make sure that they get involved with a company that provides that kind of support that a budget blinds does, or a money mailer does, or a supporting strategies does, so that they're not doing the detail of the work because they don't have an attention span like the associator or the accomplisher or the contributor. Very short attention span. And the one thing about the influencer is they need lots of accolades. So if you want to connect, you want to establish a deeper connection with somebody that has a very strong influencer profile in their Navigator profile, give them lots of accolades. Tell them how great they are. And honestly, what happens is when that happens, they tend to cock their head, cup their hand to their ear and say, "What did you say?" Not that they didn't hear you. They want it again and again and again and again. They can't get enough. This, by the way, is what put Great Clips for Hair in trouble, is because the person that created their franchise program did it in their own image. And that image was an accomplisher influencer. So the marketing material that was used at the very beginning of Great Clips was geared for an influencer. This, if you remember, I don't know if any of you remember back that far, it was, this is the right concept at the right time, at the right place, up. All of the instant gratification, gotta have it now, messaging that resonates with the influencer. But their high performer profile wasn't an influencer. They were selling lots of franchises, but the influencers would open up the first or second salon, spread their peacock feathers, say, "Look at how great I am," and then crash and burn. And we came in, we identified the profile, which was an accomplisher, associator, contributor, multi-unit operator, and that's what turned it around completely for them. So what's important, and again, as you're having conversations with somebody that has the influencer as a strong profile or part of their profile, it's all about image. It's all about sex appeal. Yeah, they like challenge because, you know, they think they can do it all. They like leverage. They like playing leapfrog. Prestige, you know, anything that gives them status or money or power, they love. They love control. They love recognition. And they're highly egocentric. So, as I said before about the accomplisher, you really don't ever want to put them up on the stage and give them accolades because they don't need it. They have their own personal yardstick of how they know when they've reached a success level. But the influencers, you definitely want to put them up on stage and give them that spotlight. Where do you find them? You find them at motivational seminars because they always want to learn. And again, it's all about leapfrogging. It's all about gaining and leveraging what somebody else has experienced and then them trying to make it work for themselves. Ski lodges, slopes, anything dealing with sports, at the gym, trendy businesses. So whenever there's a new restaurant opening or a new retail store that's opening that's cool, you'll find the influencers there. And they're all around the auto dealers because they're always looking at the greatest, the latest, the greatest, this and that, and this and that with the automobiles. Same thing's true with electronic toy stores, tanning salons because it's all about image, or hair salons, wherever they can be seen. So what they're going to look for is anything that's sales and marketing oriented. businesses where they can change people's minds. Now, this is key because the value system of the influencer is they pride themselves on their ability to influence somebody's mind, somebody's decision-making process, somebody's buying process. They love that. They get a high from doing that. When they're talking about the investment level for a business, they tend to feel that's not an issue. But that's in their opinion. Because remember, if it costs $50, they're going to spend $55, $60. So they've got that carrot. They like retail if it's fashionable or anything else that's trendy and futuristic with cutting-edge technology. But remember, from an income standpoint, they're going to need instant gratification, and they always think they are better, stronger, faster, more effective than everybody else. So the image and the type of business is important. They work. They're willing to put in the long hours if it results and gives them the status that they want. But you don't want them around employees. These are what somebody used to call the Lone Ranger. These are the people, because they don't have the emotional temperament to deal with other people. They don't have the patience to deal with other people. They can only deal with themselves. They like the bragging rights. They want the growth, but they don't have the patience. So it's got to be something that's going to produce immediate results, because they are results driven. But again, anything dealing with human resources, anything dealing with delegation and employees, they're not good at that at all. Anything dealing with their ego is. And because they don't have the attention span, they're not into details. And they're not going to fill out reports or create business plans unless they're forced to. Now, what's interesting is that when you're talking to somebody, or if you've been talking to somebody in the past without realizing it, and they've actually got a pretty high influencer score, when you ask somebody to fill out your preliminary qualification form and it's got financial data, financial information, the accomplisher is not going to give that information to you. So we can, depend upon the brand, depend upon the clientele and the profile, we tend to skinny it down for the accomplishers. The influencers, they'll fill it out, and they'll fill it out faster than anybody else will. But it may not be reliable data. It's what they think. So you've always got to check it with the influencer. And again, anything dealing with details, they're not good at. Again, if it's a high influencer and a high accomplisher, they're going to look at how can they improve something. How can they make the sales process faster, more effective, with faster results? And they're very fickle. They're going to change their minds. They're going to change their directions very often. And again, being financially overextended to some degree is a negative. To some degree for them it's a positive because it gives them that incentive. But they're going to skip. They're going to play leapfrog. And they don't believe they need any support. So the minute a franchisor starts policing an influencer or watching carefully what an influencer is doing, they feel it's intrusive. They feel that accountability to others is not a good thing for them. And then on the other hand, they bore easily. So their minds are racing. Their minds are wandering. So that's the influencer. Any questions about the influencer?
Yeah, Craig. You said that like filling out the reports, they would just give you what they think. Is it more what they think or more what they feel?
Well, the feel part of it, the emotional part of it, is going to come from the associator. So you have to look at the associator. The influencer, remember, it's coming from their ego. So they may portray themselves very differently than what they are in real life, in financial statements, in questionnaires. And that's one of the reasons why when we constructed the Navigator assessment, we made it bulletproof. You can't monkey with it. You can't predict that if I answer this question this way, it's going to result in this. It doesn't happen that way. So, yeah. But that's a great question.
Thank you.
Yeah. So now let's go to the associator. Let's go to the emotions, which is the interpersonal skills, the people attributes. It's really very interesting. And again, it depends on where they score on the continuum. The associators are amiable. They're very accommodating, very strong work ethics. So when we talk about values, associators have blinders. And anything beyond those blinders is incongruent to their value system. Strong attention to detail. They're dependable, loyal, compassionate, and customer service oriented. Now, associators have such a strong attention span, and I've tested this throughout the years. They'll read every single manual. They'll read every single paper, and you can actually test them. They'll read every section of an ops manual, and you can test them and say, okay, this is a particular topic. They'll tell you what section it's in, and some of them may even tell you what page it's on. So they're very detailed. They can drill down and do the deep dive. And they tend to be very realistic. Now, let's go back to risk, because one thing that I will talk about a great deal is risk factors. The accomplisher is medium to high risk. The influencer is high risk. There's nothing moderate about them at all. The associator is mid to low risk. They don't want to put all the cards on the table. And what's interesting to them, income is not a motivator. Safety, security, and being accepted or being a part of something is. So the influencer, it's all about income. For the associator, it's all about safety and security. So here's where the messaging that the franchisors deliver is oftentimes incongruent. Where they're looking for a sales and marketing person, they say, join our family. Well, the influencer's not interested in joining anybody's family but their own. They want the immediate results. On the other hand, if the target market is an associator, safety, security, being a part of something, if you start talking about income and you force them to start looking at item 19, it's incongruent to their value system. I'll give you, for instance, when we developed the profile for Mrs. Fields Cookies, it was done with an associator in mind. It's a very routine business, small number of employees, manageable, and regular customers. To give you another idea of a perfect example of an associator business is Starbucks. If you're a regular customer at Starbucks, either the barista or the person behind the cash register will end up knowing your name, what time you come in, what you order, and will anticipate that. And what's interesting, I don't know if everybody saw the press release, but Starbucks is with 100 locations around the country, they're now testing ice cream. Because anything dealing with treats and stuff like that, it draws a regular clientele. So the other thing about the associator is this. The accomplisher is going to hire people to be part of their organization based on competencies, skills, being able to do the job. The influencer is not going to hire anybody. They don't trust anybody. The associator is going to bring people on that are friends, families, and people that are part of their quote unquote the tribe. So as you're talking to somebody that the influencer is a strong part of their profile, talk to them about friends and family. Talk to them about who they would bring in to that particular business to make their efforts stronger. Very blue collar, much larger percentage of the population. What's really interesting is that if you look politically how we're divided in this country, the blue states with the accomplishers tend to be the higher population areas, the coasts and the major markets. The red states, or the associator states, is the breadbasket of America. And that's really the core to America. And if you go back and you look politically at how politicians win, they don't talk about religion. They don't talk about safety and security in the blue states. They do that in the red states. So the fear of the associator is being separated from loved ones, people that are part of, because their value system is to be part of something. They want to be a part of something, whether it's family, whether it's the church, whether it's the Chamber of Commerce, the sports team. Doesn't matter. It's wherever they can be an integral part of it. They may not contribute to it. They're mostly participants, but they definitely want to be a part of something. So let's look at the continuum. At 45%, the need to belong begins. So you'll see some patterns that are pretty consistent amongst the profiles. At 70%, it's a dominant behavior. But guess what? When it starts to reach into the 90s, and it actually starts more in the 80s, that need to belong, that safety, that security, that desire becomes excessive. And what happens is they end up becoming incredibly needy. So if you've ever talked to somebody, if you know somebody that needs that touchy-feely, high-touch kind of relationship, it's generally because of the associator. And trust is very important to them. If you tell them you're going to call at 4:30 on Friday, you better call them at 4:30 at Friday. Or better yet, you call them at 4:25. If you're late, what happens is it starts to diminish their trust in you. So the trust is very important. The associator has a much broader focus than the influencer, but they can't multitask. They drill down, not across. So it's vertical, not horizontal. They work with family and close friends, needs a lot of attention, and wants the routine. So what's important to them? And again, these are all great words to use when you're talking to them. Intertwine these words into the conversations. God, loyalty, security, family, commitment, togetherness. So if a franchise is looking for somebody that has a high associator influence, join our families, a good idea. Anything dealing with the country, they're very passionate. They like teamwork, dependability, safety, and establishing a relationship is more important. Now, in your relationship with somebody that is a pretty significant associator, they like routine. So as you get into the vetting process and the transactional process of dealing with somebody that is a associator influence, they like the routine. And they're willing to participate. If you say, this is a pipeline funnel that we want you to follow, they will. The influencer is going to leapfrog it. The accomplisher is going to determine whether or not it fits them. And they'll participate as they think it's important. This was one of the downfalls, and I don't mind discussing it because I have with them and with Fran Connect. But if you remember Process Peak or this pipeline process, open them into this virtual process. And once they completed this process, then the gates would open to the next process. Then the gates would open and continually go all the way through to the delivery of the FDD. The accomplishers didn't want to go through that. The influencers had no desire to do it. And the only ones that went through it were the associators. And the difficulty is, as it comes out, the after effect was a lot of franchise companies that were using Process Peak sold franchises to associators, which fit right in, but they weren't the high performers. So where do you find them? Anything dealing with family, barbecues, picnics, magazines that deal with family, children's soccer, sports games, anything dealing with their children, because nothing's more valuable to them than their family. Memorabilia stores. These are the people that can sit back and tell you about all the baseball cards that they used to have. and again, anything dealing with kids, high school, college games, American auto dealerships. So where the influencer will look for flash, the associator is going to look for stability and what can I do to build America. You know, that's Trump's message, make America great again. You know, the blue states are saying, we're good right now. The red states for many years felt like they weren't being listened to. And that's how he was able to capture in the Rust Belt. Church groups, community functions, anything like that. Family reunions. So, you know, in some cases, we advise our clients to advertise on websites such as Classmates. So the kinds of businesses that they're going to seek are service-oriented, not sales and marketing. And the reason is, if you remember going back to the skills, they're basically sales adverse. The way that they're going to communicate the value proposition of a product or a service is by establishing relationships. So they're relationship builders. Hands-on, single unit, they love routine. I don't know if any of you, I chuckle about this all the time. I don't know if any of you remember, but many years ago, probably about 10 years ago, the employees of a Starbucks in Oregon, I believe, all put their money together, all associators, all put their money together and won a huge lotto. And USA Today did a whole big story about these people because every single one of them said in the interview, well, the money's not going to affect me. I'm still going to wake up at the crack of dawn and deliver coffee to my customers. So the income wasn't, the irony was, the income and the money wasn't important to them. The prestige wasn't important to them. Getting back into the into the reality of things, getting back into the trenches is what was important to them. Anything dealing with regular hours, routine, very few products or inventory control by others. It needs to be something very simple where they can have good relationships with the customers. The industry with minimal change. They don't want change. They don't like change. Low cost, they tend not to have a lot of money, and low risk. So one of the things that we do, and you'll see this as the patterns develop, is that when we're talking to somebody that has the associator influence in their profile, and you look at the amount of investment, you may want to suggest to them that they put a group together. And the combined resources of the group will bring that investment level and the financial capabilities more up to speed. And I'll show you, you have the ability to merge and combine up to 6 surveys into one so that you can see the dynamics of who's going to be doing what and so on and so forth. We do that with Which. I mean, Which we just did, a survey just came in where there's 5 partners. Now what's interesting with Which, as it is with a lot of other franchises, is that they're foreigners. And the foreigners from a lot of other countries, even Canada, Pakistan, India, whatever, they love to do things as a group. So one of the questions that we do ask in the initial questionnaire for the Connect Me is, will you have partners? If so, have them take the survey as well. They like the strong corporate support. They like it when corporate is in their face, as long as it's not obtrusive. Again, they love the detail. They're very team and people oriented. They're going to follow the system. Where the influencer is going to start looking at ways of improving it, the associator wants to get right into it and just blend right in. Great customer service skills. I think one of the best customer service organizations I've ever seen is Pella Windows out of Pella, Iowa. Red State, associator company, and their customer service was amazing. Okay, their concerns is they may want more support than what franchisors are willing to offer. So you know how a lot of franchisors are saying our franchise is high-tech, low-touch? Associators want high touch, low tech. They want that touch. They want that constant contact. They're not going to cause conflict. They don't deal with conflict well at all. So what happens is that if you've got an associator franchisee or even an associator GM for a franchisee, if they're having conflicts with their employees, they don't do well in conflict resolution. And that's one area where we either suggest they take classes, training, or our life coaches help them deal with that issue of having to face conflict. Trust is very fragile. They're not interested in building empires. They're okay with a single unit, single territory, keep it simple. So that's the associator. Questions before we go on? You're going to see as we get into the profile combinations and the dynamics of these profiles, it's absolutely fascinating. Okay, let's move on then to the contributor. Now, again, the contributor is very different. So the associator is all about the interpersonal skills. The accomplisher is all about the drive, the ambition, the leadership. The influencer is all about the communication, the sales, the marketing, prestige. The contributor is all about contribution. Their value system is, what can I do to enrich the lives of the people I come in contact with? That's their success metric. They're very selfless, where the influencer is very selfish. By the way, you'll very rarely ever find in a profile where the combination has the influencer and the contributor at the same levels. That's not going to happen. And these are the people that want to have a direct and positive impact on others. They pride themselves in that ability, and especially the employees. Now, that translates to leadership. And you'll find that somebody that has a very high contributor score will do everything they can for their employees. And we've even seen it go as far as, education, health benefits, things like that, because they have an incredible amount of empathy. They're often environmentally, spiritually, and politically conscious. They know what's going on around them. And they're not going to get involved in any kind of business that doesn't have a direct impact. Now, here's where some of the contradictions occur. Let's take that whole Bright Star space, caring for the elderly and things like that. Their franchisee profile is not the contributor. Their franchisee profile is a sales and marketing person, because that business model requires somebody to go out and establish the relationships. The caretaker is a contributor. See? So where the contributor is going to be drawn to that kind of business, got to get them off that path. And unless they want to be a caretaker, and then they can go to work for a franchisee that owns, a senior care. And the other thing you're probably not going to see is a dominant contributor, because one, they generally don't look at self-employment. They'll tend to look at, as I mentioned earlier in the last presentation, sciences, social sciences, medical sciences, anything where they can make a difference. And again, I'll share with you when we get to the next slide talking about the continuum, how that comes into play. They are very honest, they're very loyal, they have a very high sense of integrity, and will not do anything that they feel is out of or beyond their value system and integrity. They're well networked, well respected, willing to contribute as necessary. And you'll generally find the contributor and the associator running parallel, because it's all about people, having the empathy on people and the ability to enrich the lives of the people they come in contact with. They tend to be highly educated. Don't ever try to manipulate or trick them. Let them elicit from them what the process is that they'll feel comfortable with. Much smaller percentage of the population, but it is a fast-growing segment. Their fear is being tricked or being manipulated. So establishing trust, establishing integrity, and value of who you are and what you're doing is very important to the contributor. Now, let's look at the continuum. It's not at the 45%, it's at the 55%. It's a little higher bar. And what you'll find is people that are below 55%, they really don't care about others. And by the way, I wanted to share with you an interesting story about the associators that, remember, it was at 45%. Anybody that has a very low associator score really doesn't care about people. When they get up to the 80s and the 90s, they care so much about people and about being liked and being accepted that it goes to the extreme. The way I can relate that to you is, have any of you seen the movie about Steve Jobs from Apple? There's one particular, well, take a look at it because it's a very interesting story. There's one particular scene because he did not care about people. And that translated to the employees, it translated to the investors, it translated to the customers, the consumers. All he was interested in was the technology. And there was one scene in the movie where Scully, who was the CEO of the company, just left an employee meeting where they really were talking about how much they really disliked him, disliked Steve Jobs. So he knocks on the door of Steve's office, opens it up. Steve's sitting there over a drafting board creating, and Scully says to him, "Don't you care?" So without moving, Steve turns his head and says, "Care about what?" And Scully says, "Don't you care that they hate you?" And Steve Jobs said, "No, it's not that I don't care. I'm indifferent. It doesn't matter to me." So that's the associator. The contributor is a little different. They do care, but if it's low, they don't really care. Enriching the lives of others doesn't really matter. And you'll see that it's like musical instruments that in a lot of cases, when it's a lower contributor, it's going to be a higher influencer. Not selfless, but selfish. So at 65%, it starts. At 82%, it's pretty strong. Very service-oriented people, not necessarily strong in business unless they've got the associator and the accomplisher scores. When their scores reach the 90 percentile, this is where it becomes the extremist, and they tend to gravitate towards Habitat for Humanity, save the whales, save the planets, and if they're really in the high 90s, they're tree huggers. They care more about nature than they do people. And again, as I mentioned, these are the kinds of people that with a very high contributor score, they don't want anything that's superfluous to life. They want something that is meaningful to life. And this is where you'll find doctors, nurses, academia, teachers, professors, social services, social workers. And again, if it's a dominant contributor, they generally aren't going to look at a franchise unless it's a meaningful franchise. So if we move on, what's important to them is contribution, integrity, spirituality. So an educational franchise, when we did the profile for Primrose Schools, the contributor was a very significant part because it has to be somebody that's very interested in contributing. They love enrichment. They're very selfless. They're very knowledgeable. They love things where there's an expression. They will gravitate in some cases to politics, the ecology. They're honest. They do like healthcare. But again, this is where that conflict occurs because they're not necessarily good at owning a senior care franchise, but they're great at working in one. Where do you find them? Political debates, fundraisers, lectures, anything dealing in the medical field, colleges, universities, bookstores, libraries, nature trips. You know, people that go on these hikes to Kilimanjaro, they tend to be high contributors. Bless you. They love climbing mountains. They love the antique auto auctions and like resale shops. They like things that are inspirational, educational, and transformational. So even with our life coaches, Rick will tell you that we look for people that are significant in the contributor, because these are the people that take an interest in others. They like things that are related to the health or the environment. They're good at consulting or teaching, medical or healthcare, providing there's not sales and marketing. Now, if you've got somebody that's a high contributor, we know automatically they're not going to be good at sales and marketing. Here's their success factor. Their success factor would be to find a partner that is an influencer so that it balances out all four profiles. Very team-oriented. You know, we can't say this enough. They want to make a difference. They like variety. They're good at establishing relationships, but it's got to be something that's impactful and giving of themselves. We've all met people that are like this, where I'll share with you back in the mid-'80s, when I first started to look at the need for an assessment tool, one of the key members of our mastermind, Professor Heller, I had him working on some consulting projects. Matter of fact, he worked on Circle K with me here in the Phoenix area back in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. Well, we were at a meeting one day, and I said, wow, what a cool tie that is you've got on. You know what he did? He stopped everything. He took the tie off, and he said, here, it's yours. And he loved doing that, and that's indicative of a contributor. Loyal, dependable, they want to contribute to everybody's success. They'll follow the systems. They're also very good networkers, but they're hard to sell. They won't be manipulated, and from a decision-making process, they're very slow, and the reason being is they have to make decisions based on consensus. So the accomplisher is going to make decisions based on both the brain and the heart. The influencer is going to make decisions based on the heart very quickly. Very fast decision makers, way too fast. The associator is more the heart than the brain. And the contributor is a combination of both of them, but they need other validation. They need others to be a part of that consensus, be part of that decision-making process. Okay, let's look at profile combinations. Here's where the fun starts. Any questions before we move on? Okay, so we've come up with some typical profile combinations. This would be the dominant accomplisher, and then the subordinates are the associator, influencer, contributor. So this person is going to be more sales and marketing than leadership oriented. But it all switches when the influencer goes here and the contributor goes here or here. Now, the good news is you don't need to become a behavioral psychologist to figure all this stuff out. We do it for you. It's all fully automated. So, if we were to look at this, the accomplisher, associator, influencer, contributor, definitely a big picture person. Very detail-oriented as a result of the associator. Empire builder, but yet safety and security is important to them. And depending upon the associator score, they may tend to hire employees based on fit, not necessarily competencies. So you have to look at the way in which these interface with each other. The profile will need a touchy-feely contact during the process unless the accomplisher scores are at or in the higher ranges. Then they don't need that touchy-feel. Very motivated by safety, security, and a sense of belonging. will like the fact that the brand is a mature brand. So the accomplisher associator likes the fact that it is a mature brand. The more the influencer comes into play, they like things that are new. They like things that are trendy. So if we look at early adopters into brands, the influencer is certainly going to play a key, not the accomplisher and the associator. And the influencer score is a very important factor because if they're looking at multiple locations, they need to be a motivator for their entire team. So that's how that comes into play. The accomplisher associator contributor, where the least is the influencer, they're definitely capable of being able to execute multiple franchises, multiple locations. Now, what's interesting is the accomplisher associator contributor, depending upon the percentages, is the profile of a multi-unit operator. They tend not to be predisposed. So, for instance, they're not going into the game, wanting hamburgers or hot dogs or mufflers or this or that. They'll consider anything as long as it fits their needs. But what happens is that the accomplisher, associator, contributor combination is high drive, great interpersonal skills, and great leadership skills. These are the people that are the motivators for teams of people. So if you look back at people that have bought multiple location franchises through you, they're generally going to be an accomplisher, associator, contributor. Strong customer service, they can multitask, they can open multiple locations. The accomplisher part of it doesn't get flustered. It's like they're sitting in a swivel chair, and they can deal with employees, the advertising agency, the realtors, this, that, so on and so forth. They don't get flustered. If it's reversed and the associator is the dominant and the accomplisher's back here, they tend to get flustered, depending upon how much the accomplisher supports them. This profile is not sales and marketing oriented, and they won't have the drive or the ability to sell unless the influencer is real high. Now, if you remember when we first started off, I indicated high scores in the Navigator do not win. It's not like bowling. Low scores do not win. It's not like golf. We want moderation. And as we proceed, I'll start showing you real live assessments because we want to look at people and see whether or not there's peaks and valleys, because that means there's an imbalance, and there's a number of ways in which that imbalance can be leveled off. So this is a good family-oriented kind of franchise. They want safety, security, and the key is the influencer score. Even though it's down here, down at the bottom, it's still going to play a very important part or not. Highly customer service if the candidate has a moderate to high associator scores. They'll support customers. They'll establish personal, long-lasting relationships. They don't really need a lot of attention unless that associator score starts getting very high. If the influencer score is low and the associator is high, income's not a motivator. Doing a great job, accomplishment is. So, again, a lot of it's going to be based on the accomplisher. You can have these combinations, but with low scores, and that drive's not going to be there. So those are things that, and the odds are they're not somebody ready to buy. So those are things that if you want to coach them, let's say you're talking 6-month period, we would coach them over a period of 6, 8, 10, 12 months and look at ways in which we can increase those scores to prepare them for entrepreneurship, for ownership. The accomplisher, influencer, associator. This is the sales and marketing. This is ideal for somebody who's in a sales and marketing role. By the way, with Window Genie out of Cincinnati, Rick Nonnell, the president and the founder, is incredibly analytical. And when we did the profiling, when we did the benchmarking and created his profile, and now that he's got time under his belt using it, he has discovered that, yeah, this is very important, but it's the influencer scores. And when somebody fits the profile and is inside the recommended scores, especially for the influencer, it's the difference of $120,000 a year in sales, immediate sales. So he won't take somebody whose influencer score is either too low or too high compared to the recommended scores that we created. If the associator score is high, 80% plus, they're going to have empathy, be a relationship sales representative. They could potentially become a lone ranger. So they don't want a lot of people around them. They want to just blaze the trail themselves, leave them alone to their own devices. And in the case of Which, it's the profile not of the franchisee, but of the general manager. And what was really very interesting, I think I shared with you, when we did the profiling for both Which and Potbelly, which is similar business models, the difference between their high-performing locations and their mid and poor locations was the influencer score of the general manager. Because if that influencer score is there, they'll get outside the four walls, and they'll network with the community. They'll network with other businesses. They'll network with the consumers and the citizens and the chambers. And that generally is what makes the difference. But if the score is very high, they're not going to provide you with financial information on their own. You're going to have to dig and really get into who these people are and what their financial information really looks like. The image that they present is very important. They need to have the latest and the greatest automobile, clothing, homes, even if they can't afford it. So, it's like going back to the lotto winners. Some of these people, they don't know what to do with the money, so they do what they think is right, and then they go through it. So that's why a lot of the lotto winners don't keep their wealth. The high accomplisher scores will tame a high influencer score, but they're braggarts. They like to boast. They can make a great ambassador of the brand if they'll abide by the parameters. Now, the fourth one is the associator, the dominant associator, accomplisher, contributor. Things change. The playing field has changed. As I mentioned before, if they're interested, they need to be contacted immediately and on a regular basis. They'll drive the interpersonal skills and the value of wanting to be a part of something. They'll want a franchise that is high touch, low tech. The support should be regular. And when you're talking to them in the upfront, in the vetting process, use the words that relate to them, that resonate with their value system, their belief system. Now, one of the questions that I love to ask people that are in the process of buying a franchise is, how will you know when you found the right franchise? Is it something that you're going to hear? Is it something that you feel? Is it something that you'll see? This is a good question to ask everybody, certainly early on in the process, because what this is going to tell you is what is their value system, and also what is their learning style. Because, see, some people learn by what they hear. That's being auditory. Some people learn by what they see. That's being visual. And some people learn by what they feel. That's kinesthetic. Some people need all three. That's their internal validation process. So I would highly recommend that with every one of your conversations, you always ask them, okay, how will you know when you have found the right business? How will you know when you found the right franchise? They'll tell you. And the more you elicit information from the candidate, the more trust you're going to build with them. Anybody that's a high associator is going to go out of their way to be liked and accepted. So especially if it's up, in the mid-80s, low to mid-80s, they're going to do everything they can to avoid avoid alienating themselves from being liked or being accepted by somebody. In this particular scenario with these three, and by the way, everybody has all four at one time. Profiles and assessments that give you one or two, you're actually better off buying Linda Goodman's Sun Sign book, because you'll get more information from that than you will from a profile that gives you one profile. So the key in this particular case is the contributor, because that's what enables them to build teams. Very detail-oriented. They're going to be very empathetic to employees, and they're going to give second chances when behavior is incongruent or if there's a problem, if there's conflict. And they'll be a motivator and a team player unless the accomplisher scores are very high, 90%, in which case they probably shouldn't own a franchise. They could own a business, but not one that is a rules-based business, which is what a franchise is. You have to play by the rules. And the influencer profile is what's going to enable them to go beyond the four walls and network and, instigate, business, cause it to happen. And now we're looking at somebody who's a dominant influencer, accomplisher, associator. Well, right off the bat, with the influencer, let them pave the way, because they're not going to be forced into doing anything. It's got to be their way or the highway. So you want to elicit from them what their needs are, how they make decisions. And we know that it's sales and marketing oriented because their businesses and their value system is how can I influence somebody's buying process and decision making. They love to sell. And by the way, if somebody's real high in the influencer, they're not relationship building people. They are out and out salespeople. They could sell ice to the Eskimos. This profile is going to have difficulty executing and implementing a sales and marketing business model because they're going to want to follow their own gut. They're going to want to follow their own rules instead of following somebody else's rules. So you have to be very careful and identify where in the continuum their scores are. Potentially very self-centered and potentially narcissistic, because the influencer is going to take over. So that's the four profiles. Any questions? And again, as I said before, it may seem like Rosetta Stone, learning a new language. I like to use the analogy of going to Michael's and buying a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle and thinking, wow, this looks great, love the picture, take it home, take the top off, go to the dining room table, turn the box upside down, and now you're looking at 1,000 pieces. And you think, oh my God, what do I do? Well, you start at the corners, and then you do the edges, and then you do this corner and this corner, and you start working your way in. The same thing's true with understanding and learning the Navigator. And your learning speed is based upon yourself. We've had people that have nailed the Navigator within a matter of a couple of weeks. And we've had some people that it's taken a while. Ultimately, they get it. Ultimately, that light bulb goes off. So before we continue, are there any questions?
Yeah, Craig, do you find, I know that not one profile is better than the other, or, it is what it is, but do you find that one profile seems to have more, for lack of a better term, influence in terms of how well somebody's going to do in a business? And I know you just talked about different businesses or different profiles, but I just wondered if one of the profiles seems to have more influence over the other three.
Well, I think what you're going to find is it's also highly dependent on the business model. So go back to remember the part of the PowerPoint with the skills.
Mm-hmm.
Let me pull that up because that was early on. Okay. This particular slide is key. Yep. So it's here that if it's a sales and marketing oriented franchise, you can see the accomplisher influencer does really well.
Right.
If it's business administration, the influencer's not so great. So it becomes the accomplisher, associator, contributor. If it's product or technical, it's, again, different. But what you'll also find is a single unit franchise is generally geared for a sales and marketing, customer service oriented profile. If it's a multi-unit franchise, it's somebody who's geared for understanding and being able to implement the business administration and the people management. Make sense?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's all it'll ultimately come together, and then what you'll be able to see as you go through this and as you start looking at different profiles and fit, you'll see that it's pretty predictable.
One of the things you mentioned earlier, Craig, said that they could change the profile score, and I was sort of surprised by that because Myers-Briggs, for example, that I'm more familiar with, I've taken that 3 times during my lifetime, maybe 10 years apart, different things, and it was pretty much the same each time.
You're blipping, so I'm like hearing every other word.
Like, for example, when I took the Myers-Briggs test, and that talks about attributes and style, I took it every 10 years, like, for various reasons, and it came up about the same. Someone did this, it come up about the same every 10 years?
Okay, so your initial question was the profiles can change?
That's what I'm asking. Can it change, or is it pretty much just who you are, and it's going to be like that no matter when you take it?
Well, the dominant and the subordinates will never change. The percentages can. And what we tend to do with a lot of our clients is test, retest, test, retest. So, because part of what we built, the subtlety of the Navigator, is we built an adaptive mode into it. So if we take somebody right now and we look at their profile, the dominant, the subordinates, and the percentages, we come back in 8 months to 12 months after they've begun the process, whether it's at the employee level or at a franchise owner level, we can see how much of that starts to change. Now, it's not going to change drastically. And Rick can tell you that from a coaching standpoint, it's going to bump up 2 percentage points. It'll come down a few percentage points, but it's not a drastic change. Anything that's 4% or more is just not going to happen. There isn't a training program on the planet that's good enough to change behavior that much. So now I'll tell you what's very interesting is, and we see this, and we're the only ones that can see this, that if somebody's out fishing and they're out looking for a franchise, they may end up taking the Navigator from 3 or 4 different brands. And when we do a search for a particular name, it'll come up and show us which brands they took the assessment for. And when we look at and compare those scores, they're always within a couple of percentage points of each other. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Sure.
A question along that line then is, if we've got a client that takes a Navigator and then we refer them to a franchise that uses a Navigator, are they going to retake it under the franchise or?
Yes. And they are because the metrics, the recommended scores for that franchise are built into their survey, not yours.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
That seems like
one other question. Well,
that's just like there should be something that they could look at behind the scenes change because no one wants to take the same test again.
Well, remember, first of all, it's not a test; it's a survey.
Or a survey, but I mean, still, I would if someone gave that to me and I had just taken one, I would say, "Can't you use this?"
Okay, but remember, on the other hand, that's our lifeline. That's our bloodline in terms of revenues because we get paid on a per survey basis from the franchisors. They need to take it again for that franchisor because remember, that whole behavioral mapping process where the strengths and the weaknesses, the areas of focus in each of those 9 categories is very important to the franchisor. So they're going to want it. And if somebody's interested in that particular franchise to take 8-9 minutes out of their life to do it again, it's not a big deal. If it was Myers,
I guess I was under the impression that as we got more and more companies that were using the Navigator, that we would have access to what their high performers are, so we would know in terms of which companies to maybe suggest. You have a lot of different options, and maybe they're interested in the handyman business, and maybe there's 1 or 2 that the profile matches more closely than another.
Absolutely. And that gives you the insight. On the other hand, what the franchisor needs is the output from the Navigator, not just the scores. They need the output in terms of where the strengths are, where the weaknesses compared to their metrics. So it's customized to every franchisor. So where you may see that, okay, a handyman franchise like Mr. Handyman or something like that is a good fit for them, and you refer them to a Mr. Handyman, Mr. Handyman's still going to have them take the Navigator again because they need to see where the strengths, where the weaknesses, they need to see that behavioral map as it relates to their business model. It's not generic. It's not a generic psychometric tool. It's actually customized.
Well, I think one of the things to address that is upfront early on, let your client know that the franchisor is going to be interested in how well they're willing to follow a system, which would kind of predict whether they're going to be successful in the franchise. And this is just part of their systematic process that they're looking at.
Well, yeah, it's the right direction, Jim. What you're going to want to share with the candidate is, okay, we're going to be able to see businesses best suited for your profile. That way, we're going to be able to refer you to something that fits you. Now the franchisor is going to want to see how well you fit with them. So that's how the fit is carried through to the franchisor.
One other question. Do you find if somebody's under a lot of stress, recent stress, like losing a job they've been at for 20 years, does that influence this much? Because I know some of the types of assessments or quote-unquote personality profiles can be influenced by when somebody's under high stress.
Not as much as you'd think. Because they're still going to answer the questions pretty accurately, which is what we want. What will happen is they'll end up thinking more about the questions because we really don't want them thinking a lot about the questions. We want them to go through the question, answer it. Go through the question, answer it. So they might labor the point. So, I mean, if we had the ability on the back end to measure how long it takes somebody to go through the assessment, that's where it would be seen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Well, now that we completed this 3-hour plus training, what do we do next?
Well, we got more to go. I want to start going through this one. We can set up a time to do this. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start going through actual real live situations on how to use the Navigator. So we'll be doing that. But what I want to be able to show you is a couple of things. One, we'll start sending out the bookcases for the personal profile reports. We have videos and workbooks that we'll be sending out to you. Also, what I want to be able to show you is real live examples. And I can take a particular brand. Is everybody familiar with ArcPoint?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, let's take ArcPoint. They've done 9 already this month. Uh-oh. Time is it? It's only 1:50. I know Bluehost was okay. Here we go. Okay, so you will have your own control panel, just the same way that ArcPoint has theirs, and you'll receive, if you haven't already, an email that has your username and password. So you'll go up here to Client Login, and if you click on that, that'll bring up the entryway to the control panel. You insert your username and your password there. Once there, this is what you see. You're going to see the name of the survey participant, a time stamp of when they took it, whether they're looking for single or multiple, and the account. Now, some clients have multiple accounts. The delete and the email is not going to be visible on yours. That's only on mine. And then you'll be able to look at who took the survey. And from here, you can go in a number of different directions. One, you can click on their name, and up comes all of the information related to that particular person. These are the questions that are asked in the ArcPoint Navigator. Now, this person indicated they want single. You will have the same buttons at the bottom of your control panel that you see here. So you can press on single. And when you do, and this answers your question about, do they need to take it again? And the answer is yes. Because you'll know, okay, maybe the ArcPoint's a good business model, but here's what they need to see. They need to see exactly whether or not that person's a good fit or not. Now, oftentimes in your world, somebody's going to come to you and say, listen, all I want is a single location to start. But in reality, they've got a profile that's best suited as a multi-unit operator. And if they had access to capital, they might make that move. So we have the ability in ArcPoint, and you'll have that ability where there's a single unit and a multiple unit profile. You can see neither way. This person's just not a good fit. So
the areas between the two little white lines where you want to have the blue or the purple or the red or the green, ideally?
Yes. This is the sweet spot. And this sweet spot is statistically valid, meaning enough of their high performers score within this range. The mid performers are down here or up here, and same with the poor performers. So yes, this is how you'll be able to tell, this is how franchisors tell if somebody's a good fit or not. Now, in this particular case, and we call it the personal source code, what it does is it ranks the 4 profiles in descending order. So this person is a dominant associator, and then the accomplisher, influencer, and contributor follow. The influencer and the contributor are both at 64%. That's not great, certainly compared to where ArcPoint wants them. Now, let's look at another one. So I don't know these people. So this person also is looking at single unit. So let's click on single unit. Now you can see the scores are a little closer, but there's still a deficit here. So the odds are is when the survey came in for ArcPoint, this would not come out. Anybody that scores in all four for the franchisors comes out as high potential. Anybody that scores and is within a couple of percentage point is going to come out as acceptable or yellow light. And anybody that's more than 4 or 5 percentage points above or below is going to come out as careful potential. The odds are this person came out either as acceptable or careful. And this is a key. This is a determining factor for ArcPoint as to whether or not they're going to put points on the board or put points on the board with the right people. Now let me find somebody that really hits the profile. All right, this is a little better. Single unit. Okay, now look. This person's pretty good. This person has all four at or inside the recommended scores. Now, the reason why the franchisor would want to run this through with this individual is to see where the strengths and weaknesses are and what can be done to help increase the influencer score. And again, as I said, a couple of percentage points is very possible. You can change behavior a few percentage points in the Navigator. So, but let's just say hypothetically that Mr. Jones has a partner. You then want to go to merge, combine the results. And what it now gives us the ability to do, here's the sweet spot. It's now going to give us the ability to go into the drop down, and I don't know these people, I'm just going to go ahead and do this. Merge and combine two profiles, husband and wife, business partners. We did this because Sears came back to us and said, you know what, we get a lot of husband and wife teams. This was 20 years ago. And now you can see that, okay, the accomplisher's all right, but look what happened. When we took this guy and this guy brought it down. So this one, the first one was at 78%. This one's 9 percentage points lower. That's not a good help. But look at the impact here. The influencer went from 69 to 63 because Mr. Fellman does not have a good influencer score for this particular business model. So you'll be able to do this, and we'll coach you through this entire process with all of your candidates as you move forward. Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's very cool. Okay. You want to look at schedules for the next continuation?
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording. Hold on.